Well, welcome back to the Thriving Life Podcast, a podcast designed to help you navigate the challenges of life, leadership, and faith. We don't want you just to survive them, but we want to help you thrive in the midst of those. And I'm back on today with my good friend, Steve Carter. And we decided to use the podcast in this season to sort of supplement and fill in the gaps in between the new series we just launched this last week that both Steve and I are going to teach in this series called Third Party. And it is an election series. If you weren't with us this last weekend, we survived week one and we didn't divide our church, which was amazing. So we're off into the series. And I just want to give a bit of a recap. We talked about the fact that the things that have our attention, the things that get our attention, and during this election season, there's going to be a whole political machine on the left trying to get us to look left, and a whole political machine on the right trying to get us to look right. And one of the things I wanted us to do, at least at the beginning, instead of looking left and right, I want us to look up. And we want us to look up, and to look up, to get our cues and to give our attention primarily to the kingdom of heaven, which is what we're associated with, and ultimately our allegiance is to be to. And that's what we talked about in this season. But before we jump into all that, and this is related, it's going to feel like a hard left turn, but Steve, how did you become a Michigan Wolverines fan? I'm just interested to know, give me the history of that. I mean, we have to talk a little college football. We're both huge college football fans. And with the season sort of hanging by a thread, I'll say, I need a little college football love. So just talk to me about the Michigan Wolverines for a minute. How do you got there?
Yeah, so my adopted father was from Grand Rapids, and he went out to California to go to USC. So, before BCS, we rooted for Pac-10 and Big Ten, obviously to be Michigan and USC to meet in the Rose Bowl. My first game that I went to, Jim Harbaugh was quarterback. We actually lost in 1987, January 1st in the Rose Bowl to Arizona State. And I loved the winged helmets. I loved 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings. I would sit on my dad's lap and we would watch Michigan football because it was usually the Big Ten game of the week on ESPN. And Michigan became about connection with my dad. And so we had this just connection and this love for Bosha and Beckler, the Fab Five. I mean, just the national championship in 1997. I mean, it was a bond that whatever was happening in the world, we could talk about recruiting. We could talk about the season. There was nothing like the fall for Michigan or March Madness for Michigan basketball. Then fast forward, my dad comes to faith my sophomore year of college. He's a vice president, property management firm in LA. And he feels God say, I want you to go back to Grand Rapids to restore a relationship with your folks. He sells everything, Joel. He moves there with my mom, and they move there. And within a few years, he comes down with leukemia. We think he has mono, but he comes down with leukemia. I'm working as a junior high pastor in Michigan. I'd gone out there with my parents. They were so new in their faith. And he goes to the local cancer hospital, starts doing chemo treatment. And where do they send him? They send him to the best cancer hospital in the state of Michigan, which is the University of Michigan. And he goes there, and these doctors find him the one perfect match for a bone marrow transplant. So during this season from the bone marrow transplant, my dad and I really got to work on our relationship and began to literally fight for just health and honesty and reconciliation. And, he passed last year. And so,
I remember seeing your post about that.
Yeah. And so for Michigan, for me, yes, it's about Harbaugh. Yes, it's about, an amazing school. Yes, it's about the blue and the maize and blue, all of that. But really it's about connection with my dad and what that school gave me in the sense of giving me more time with my dad. And so it just holds this special place in my heart. So that's a little bit of my story. I'd be actually curious about you. I mean, you're a man of
Before
integrity.
We get to that, by the way, you mentioned the Fab Five. This wasn't in our little pre preparation for this, but what do you think the over-under is? We talked about over-under on Sunday. What is the over-under on how many people listening to this podcast could name, how many of the Fab Five could they name? What do you think the over-under on that is?
I would say 70% could name three.
3.
I think, yeah. I think
Howard, Weber, and Rose. That's
yeah,
what most people.
yeah, yeah. Jimmy King, Ray Jackson.
Oh, I was gonna say, do you think I know who the other 2 are?
Oh.
You jumped me. I knew who they were.
I
I
didn't
thought you
know.
were gonna say there's no way you know who the other 2
Oh,
are. Dude,
no,
that
no.
was. I just say this. I'm not a Michigan fan, but that team was so fun. I followed them the whole season. I mean, so many people did. That was
For
amazing. So you're gonna
sure.
ask me about Auburn. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I was gonna ask you. Is like, I mean, you're a man of integrity, someone I deeply respect. You lived in New York. How does a guy of integrity actually begin to start to root for a team from the SEC named Auburn?
Oh, you
How do
mean
you
besides the fact that it's the best conference in college football? Besides that, you mean?
Well, I mean, I feel like
Oh.
you've given your attention, your association, and your allegiance to the wrong thing, but it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. So this is crazy, and this is actually to that point. And it's the reason I asked the question is because it's funny that how things get our attention. You know, obviously for a lot of us with sports, our dads, our parents were a huge influence. And actually, when I was really young, it was my mom. My mom grew up in the Pittsburgh area, and after my parents got married, they moved to the Pittsburgh area. My dad was working at a church there. And when I was little, man, we were Pirates, Penguins, Steelers, Pitt Panthers. I mean, our room, we had the drapes and the bedspreads and the lamps and the whole deal. We were all in Pittsburgh. Well, when I was in 4th grade, we moved to New York. And my dad took a job as a pastor. We moved to New York. And the crazy thing is back in that day, like there wasn't a lot of nationally broadcasted sports. And so we moved to New York, and all of a sudden the Steelers weren't on TV anymore. The Pirates weren't on TV anymore because it was all local. It was all regionalized. And so now who's on TV is the Giants and the Bills and the Yankees and the Mets. And so we're watching all these New York sports teams. And so me and my brother, literally, I'm going to get to the Auburn thing in a second, but me and my brother, we had this like moment of like, you can't switch teams. Like that's unfaithful. Like, but at the same time, we were both like, we can't cheer for our teams anymore. So we got to pick teams. And like, I remember me and my brother sitting on the floor in our room in the midst of all of our Pittsburgh stuff. And I remember him going, well, I'm going to cheer for the Yankees. And I was like, well, then I'm a Mets fan for sure. And he was going to cheer for the Bills. So I became a Giants fan, and I sort of won and lost the baseball one, because in the 80s, the Mets were actually good, but
yeah,
he dominated me with the Yankees. But I picked the Rangers, and he picked the Islanders, and I clearly won that one. So, and then we were Syracuse fans. So I was Syracuse fans because we lived in the Syracuse area, and Syracuse college sports, we were everything Syracuse. And for me, it was a big deal to switch. Like, even at a young age was instilled in me, like, you don't switch teams. You're not fair weather fans. Like, it doesn't matter how good or bad your team is. You don't switch. Having said that, we moved. So when I moved to the South, I moved to Atlanta, 20 some years ago, and 25 years ago. And it was like, people were like, so who's your team? And I'm like, well, which team are we talking about? And they're like, they only talk college sports in the South.
Right.
Right. It's not, Northeast, even Midwest, West Coast, like the pro sports usually dominates. In the South, college football is all, college sports is what it is. And so anyway, it was like, so who's your college football team? And when I would tell people Syracuse Orangemen, now Syracuse Orange, they'd be like, no, seriously, like, who's your real team? And I'm like, what do you mean? And it's like, and so it was funny because, and the other thing is they weren't on TV hardly ever. I remember growing up as a kid listening to Syracuse basketball, Dwayne Pearl Washington on the radio, laying on the floor in the dark in the living room, losing my mind when he threw an alley-oop for a last-second dunk in the game, and Ronnie Cycli and Derek Coleman, the whole thing. So when I got to the South, so now it's like you're going to games all the time, and everybody goes to college football games on the weekend. Like, this is a big deal. Or you're going to a party where people are watching college football, and it's like I suddenly realized I don't have a team, because I don't have a team that matters to anybody. And I had one buddy who was a huge Auburn fan, and like, so he started taking me to games with him, and we started going to games, and I started, I started paying attention to the players, started paying attention, to the box scores, to the, everything that, all of the recruiting and all that stuff. And it just like, I started associating. I remember the first time somebody said, so I heard you're a Tiger. And I was like, and they're like, I want to know which one. Like they're trying to decide whether they like me or not. In the South, it's like, are you a Gator? Are you a Volunteer? Are you a Bulldog? What are you? And I heard you're a Tiger. And it was like, this was a person who really didn't like LSU. And I figured they were Alabama fans while they were asking me that, but they were happy to know that I was an Auburn Tiger. But you know how this is, like when you have an allegiance, and you're the same way with Ohio State. When you find out somebody's a Buckeye, like you're suspect of their character. Like certainly they can't be a believer, and the same is true. We joke about it, but the same is true in some respects. Like when I think about, Alabama fans, I think, they're all Harvey Updikes, like that's who they are. They like poison trees of and tradition and stuff like that. It's like, no offense to the Alabama fans out there, but this is why I bring this up this is what happens in politics.
Yeah.
It's like, if I'm red and I find out somebody else is blue, it's like, I'm suddenly judging them based on this allegiance. And this is one of the things I think this is so important for many of us. What got our attention early on and what we began to associate with and the people we began to associate with, how we formed our allegiances. And some of these allegiances run so much deeper than our faith that it's like, it's almost scary to some degree. How have you seen that sort of out in your experience in ministry?
Yeah, it's funny is when I lived in Grand Rapids, I saw this up close because my dad bought a brand new truck, and I remember we were at a gas station filling it up, and someone came up to him and said, "Hey, nice truck." He's like, "Oh, thanks." He's like, "Chevy, huh?" "Yeah." He's like, "Where'd you go to get it?" He's like, "I went to Berger." "You didn't go to Classic Chevrolet?" "No." You probably got ripped off. It was like I'd always seen loyalty between Ford and Chevy. Yeah. Now it was to the dealer. You know what I mean? And I just was like, this and the guy.
Of course, you're driving a Chevy, but who did you get the Chevy from?
Who'd you get it? And you probably got ripped off. You're not too, And it was just this interesting piece of there's all these layers to allegiance, right? And so everyone's just trying to kind of box you in, almost like a picture with a frame. I'm trying to frame you in to go, I know who Joel Thomas is. I know he roots for this team. He's about this thing. It's about this thing. And it's almost like this gives me control over of whether I will let you in or whether I will push you out. Whether I will welcome you into my house and into my heart, or whether I will push you away and create suspect or walls between us. And so I've seen that, and it's really a unique time. And especially like you said, so I thought so beautifully this weekend. I mean, these next 100+ days of how we choose to act as the church are going to be important. Are we going to fall into that? Or are we going to be open to the Spirit being willing to lead us to where God wants to take us?
Yeah. And I think too, it's interesting. We talked about this weekend, it's really difficult because of the way, not just political parties, but the media plays to our fears. Yeah. And, I remember, I'm getting old enough that I remember many political cycles now. And I remember lots of them that were contentious and the nation being divided. I mean, that's sort of nothing new, but the level to which, the political campaigns are leveraging fear, almost like I don't remember a time in our history when it was like, no, you don't understand. This person, they want to destroy our country. And I'm like, who runs for president that wants to destroy our country? I mean, but this people believe this deeply that somebody's trying to get this office so they'll destroy our country. And there's echo chambers of these messages that just reinforce it to where it's hard to even realize that it's true. And, that's what fear does, I don't know what you fear in life. I mean, I guess that's a good question to just jump into. What are some of your biggest fears, by the way?
I mean, my biggest fear, besides heights, is being robbed. I mean, it's the weirdest. Yeah. I think when I was a kid, a number of the gas station behind our house got robbed multiple times, and someone jumped in our backyard. And I think for some apparent reason, I I was always like, is someone going to break in and what will happen? So I think that was just as a kid, that was my biggest fear. Now it's just heights. I'm scared of heights. So, but what about you? What would you say
I'll
yours
tell you,
is?
man, my biggest fear my whole life has been deep, dark water. Like, I remember one time being on a cruise ship, and like, this is a long time ago. I was a teenager. We're on a cruise ship, and I was on the back of the cruise ship, looking off the back of the cruise ship and watching the dark water, like, is it night? Watching the boat drive away, and you couldn't see, there was no land in any direction.
No.
And just imagining this, standing there, imagining falling off the back of that boat and watching the boat drive away in this middle of the ocean in the dark water. It just like, it marked me. Like, I was terrified of that. Like, just thinking about that is like, anyway. But I'll tell you another one from a life experience is like, in losing my dad at the age that I did when I was 17. I lost my dad when I was 17. And a weird one for me is I'm terrified of losing a family member. And the way this plays out is like, I'm definitely not a helicopter dad, but like, I am sort of way overprotective with my kids. Like, we'll go, some friends, we went on a boat recently up to Canyon Lake. There's all sorts of cliffs. And it's like, I'll tell my kids, no, you can't climb up that high. Don't climb up that high and jump off the cliff, but I'll go up there and do a gainer, like off the, like, and Jen's like you're a risk taker. Like, you do stuff that's dangerous all the time. Like, why are you like, keep our kids? And I'm like, wow, I'm afraid, and literally inside me, there's something in me that's fearful. And the reason I bring that up is because it's weird, because I don't treat myself that way. I don't operate myself that way, a certain way in life, but like, fear really controls my behavior as a dad.
Yeah.
And in a way that I think at times may keep my kids from things that they need to experience, or, things they need to learn on their own, or adventures that they should have in life. And I think the way that relates is, I don't think we realize how much fear of certain things actually controls not just our outlook or our political ideology, but it controls everything that surrounds it. Our relationships to other people, the way we view, everything from foreign policy to the economy to, it's like, and so, it's just really interesting to me to be stuck in these political times. Speaking of being stuck, I think most people their biggest fear is being stuck in a room with somebody who has a political ideology that disagrees with their own. Like, and it's like, how to navigate those conversations, and how do you keep from those becoming like, I think that's why a lot of people, shy away from political conversations.
Yeah. And I think, marketers are smart. There's a reason they get paid millions upon millions of dollars, and they recognize every human being has an ache and has a fear. And so the more that we can expose that fear, create a level of urgency, then we're going to get a quicker reaction. It's even if you look at the way things are marketed, you might die if you don't take this pill.
Exactly.
Like, I don't want to die. And so I think in that sense, people know what they're doing, and I think that's what's the hardest part. The news knows what it's doing. The commercials know the politicians know, and they're just finding that true ache within us all and exposing it with a level of urgency that said, if you don't deal with this, something's going to be taken from you. Yeah. And I think when you start going down that path, it's almost like a little bit tilt. It's like hard to get your mind, which I was so grateful for the way that you talked about attention. When that starts getting your attention, man, it's almost like a fear hamster wheel can start taking you down a road, and you're like, I just got to stop, and I got to get grounded in the right thing,
Yeah. And that causes us to, whether those things are true or not, we look at that and we go, okay, these are people are telling me you should fear this. And usually they use really good logic, and there's some truth to what they're talking about. However little it might be, there's some truth to it. And it causes us to not want to associate with that and associate with something that feels safer. I mean, that's the illustration of me with my kids. It's like, no, let's do this. This is fun too. And it's a lot safer, you know? And it's like, my boys are like, Dad, that's lame. You know, like I want to jump off the high cliff. I want to jump off the back of the boat while it's moving like you did onto somebody else while they're surfing. Like, you know, they want to do that stuff. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. Like, you know, it's like, I don't know. I just see how much it moves people. And specifically when it comes to big decisions, not just political decisions like we're talking about in election season, certainly that, but you know, I don't know about you. I've made decisions in my life out of fear that were absolutely bad decisions, and there were consequences involved in them. Do you have one you would be interested in sharing? Like, do you have is there one that comes to mind? Like, I mean, I can jump into mine if you want, but is there a decision for you that comes to mind that like you made out of fear and you thought, if I had to go back to do that over again, I think that was the wrong decision. I think I did it just because of fear.
Gosh, that's a great question. Wow. I know that there's some, but like I'm just trying to think through. What do you have one on the top of your head right now? Because
I'll give you one. So you know, when and this is probably really close to home for people who are at Mission who are listening. You know, when I first came to Mission, when I was trying to figure out, it was a really tough season. So you know, everybody, most people know that I followed somebody who had a moral failure, and there was a part of me that felt like the biggest thing I needed to do was to try to regain trust of people, like that people are going to be skeptical of the leader or the leadership, and why should they trust me? They trusted this other guy for a really long time, and he, you know, I don't really want to comment on that, but like he failed them in many ways, like. And I know he felt like he failed himself, but you know, there was just this sense in me that it felt like to associate, and whether this is a good fear or not, to associate with anything that he associated with would cause people to be more skeptical of me.
Wow.
And like, I had this fear that people wouldn't trust me if, you know, the teaching style was too similar, or the leadership style was too similar, or the vision was too similar, or the direction was too similar. And I think early on there were some decisions I made, or some things that I did, or ways in which I went about leading or teaching, or that were almost not even me. They were a reaction to what I feared people would associate me with, that I didn't want to be associated with. And I mean no disrespect. I just mean like, I was afraid if I got associated too much with the previous leader or direction or vision or whatever, that would actually cause people to be more skeptical. And I don't think that was a good decision. Like, I think there were consequences to that, and that made things cloudy for me, but also for other people as well. So that's one of the ones I think most recently.
That's powerful. Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of my life, I think for me was so grounded in performance and just trying to get people to like me. And I think I was almost afraid that if people really got to know me, that they would stick around. And so I think I had just bought into a lie. Part of it's out of, I talked about my dad, that was my adopted dad. But I think it was part of me just kind of believing that anybody who got close to me would leave. So I had to be better. And I never trusted that I was enough. And so I felt like if I really said what I liked, maybe people would leave. And so I think when you drift from your identity of who God made you to be, and you start kind of living in a people pleasing, making everybody else happy, it's just a spiral of just pain and brokenness. You get farther away from who God made you to be, and you can never live up to the person you're trying to be. I think that was so much of my childhood and high school. And I think then as I stepped more into it, probably, you know, kind of similarly to you and your story, I, you know, stepped out of a role based on just a ton of brokenness and moral failings from a mentor of mine. But I stepped out, and I was fearful of like, am I going to actually be okay? Like, I'm leaving an amazing job, an amazing pay. Am I going to be okay? And there was fear in that. It would have been easier to stay, but more
Yeah.
fearful to like put yourself and go, God, I hope that net is
Yeah.
big enough for a broken joker like
Looking
me.
back, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but looking back, like if you had allowed fear to cause you to make a different decision, I mean, that wouldn't have been the right decision. You know, like
Yeah.
that would have had a whole different set of consequences, as opposed to, you know, the consequence being, okay, I'm really going to have to trust God. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, which
Yes.
I think we all look at that and go, that's a consequence. That's uncertainty. Well, now certainly people make decisions that are bad decisions that lead to uncertainty, that are irresponsible. But here you're going, I know what the right thing to do is, but if I follow my fear, I'll probably make the wrong decision. And I
100.
thought, as you were talking, you know, about from childhood, you know, I don't know, see if you agree with this. I never thought of this before, but like, I do think that is sort of a muscle. Like there's a muscle of following our fears, that the more we do it, the more it strengthens its grip on us, versus the more we deny that, it sort of atrophies and those fears don't grip us as much. Do you think that's true?
Oh, Joel, I love the way that you just said that, because I think that is 100% true. I was just telling someone today, I don't think I would have stepped out of my role if in the 2 seasons before that, I would not have chosen to like step up and fight for truth or fight for reconciliation. I had no idea that those two
Mhm.
decisions, creating boundaries, fighting for truth, were really, really preparing me for
Yeah.
this moment.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Oh, I think I just lost Steve for a minute. Hopefully he'll jump back in here in just a second. I think that's really true what he was commenting there. You know, I I I think even like he was talking about the practice of practicing not responding just in fear, but actually, oh, here he comes back. You there?
I'm so sorry, bro.
Okay, I lost you for a second. Actually, this is much clearer, so that's great. Um, no, I was just saying, I think what you said is true. It's sort of the opposite. It's like there's also a muscle that is, you know, when you operate in faith instead of in fear, like that strengthens. And you were saying that there were a couple of decisions you made to act in faith, and that actually led you to, um, you know, sort of uh, be able to make a decision in the midst of significant fear.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think, for so many of us, um, we're unaware of, man, if we stay controlled by our fear, then it's going to be harder to break through in the next season when another kind of fear is trying to grip at our heart or at our mind. But the more that and that's what I love so much about your message this past weekend, has been like literally just us fighting for what gives us attention. What like if I have anything in my life that like will take my attention away and it be solely based on fear, well, it's just going to be harder and harder to break through that. And until I actually honor that truth and say, I'm going to fight to break through, then it becomes a game changer.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think we're just I lost your video, so we'll just your picture looks awesome anyway, though.
Oh, so sorry,
we'll
dude.
that for a minute. It's awesome being at camp, right? You're at camp,
Yeah.
right? Is that where you
I'm
are?
up in Wisconsin in the middle of like the woods up here. Like, so.
Yeah, not as amazing reliable Wi-Fi there. So
Yeah.
So before we finish, I do want to talk about one other thing. We unpacked Hebrews 13 a little bit, and in the passage, you know, if you haven't watched the message, I'll just let you go back and catch up. But it talked about how Jesus often leads us outside the camp, outside our camps, outside any other camp. In the day, it was, you know, the camp that's associated either with the temple or the empire, you know, the Jewish religious leaders, or, you know, the Roman political leaders. And, you know, I made the point that, you know, sometimes following Jesus leads us outside. In fact, oftentimes leads us outside our primary political association. and that camp. And I'm just curious what you think practically, because I didn't have time to get into a lot practically. What do you think that looks like for us specifically and practically in life? How does following Jesus at times lead us outside our camps? And what does that look like for us? Sort of, and this is sort of a two-part question, living in this nation and the duties and responsibilities of what it is to be a citizen of the United States of America, balanced with what it is for us to first and foremost primarily associate ourselves as citizens of the kingdom of heaven. I'm just interested to hear sort of your thoughts, because we talked in the message review a little bit about this, and you were talking about how practically that's not the easiest thing in the world. I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think I loved that part. It was one of my favorite parts of the message. And again, if you haven't heard the message, I couldn't recommend it enough. But like the part for me, like in Acts 1:8, Jesus says, the Spirit of God is going to come upon you in power. So it's like this, the same word we get for like dynamite. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, which was like the familiar. That's like what they knew. Judea, which was like the less than, like it was like the city didn't have the best schools, to Samaria, which was like the people that those disciples can't stand, to the ends of the earth where they had no desire to understand. And I think for us, like you got to look at your life and go, okay, in my life, how easy it is for me to stay in my familiar system, in the people who look like me, vote like me, act like me, look like me, love the same things as me. But I think we miss the Spirit's power. And the Spirit's power is going to consistently invite us into places where our dependency and expectancy isn't on what we have control over, but has to be on Him and the Son. And that's going to take us to places where we have preconceived notions that people are less than us, or there are people in our life that we can't stand, or that there are issues in this world that we don't understand. And the Spirit of God is gently going to begin moving us more and more and more if we let Him. And it's going to invite us into conversations with people that we don't believe the same things. We might disagree. We might have fundamental differences. But I think if we can walk in a posture of humility and curiosity and trust that our faith in Jesus isn't shakable, is an anchor. It's where our hope comes from. So I can trust Him that I can just be that person where I am literally just walking, trusting, and living in His guidance. That's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's good. And that's so, I love the connection there with Acts 1:8, because when you live in that sort of power, when you go, okay, the power of God, the saving power of God, the power of God to provide insight and wisdom and direction, that's what's in me. And if that's what's in me and that's what I'm yielding to control me, then conversations and venturing outside my camp, or needing to venture outside my camp, when my camp doesn't align with my association with Jesus, doesn't have to be something that creates fear in us. It doesn't have to be something that, and I think that's one of the problems is that many of us feel like that's an insecure place. When I'm going to venture outside what's familiar, what I've always aligned with, what I've always associated with, when I venture outside of that feels scary. I think there's a lot of people who've been Christians for almost too long, and they can't remember what it was like to take that first step of faith in Jesus. So many people, their first step to follow Jesus is terrifying. Like we think, oh, this is the greatest news ever, and like, why wouldn't you do this? And once everybody finds out, they're going to go, but to go, no, wait, I'm going to surrender my whole life to a new value system, to a new ethic, to a new direction. I mean, that's terrifying to some degree.
Yeah.
But the more and more you follow and you understand what you're trusting and who you're trusting and what's been promised to you, I mean, my hope is that the insecurity, I mean, the Christians who are mature we should be the least fearful, the least anxious people in this season as it relates to what's going to happen beyond November 3rd. I mean, if we're fearful and anxious about that, and that's what we lead with, that says a lot about the maturity of our faith, I think.
Yeah, and I think just like with the muscle that you were talking about is built up when we don't let fear win. The same thing, I think muscle is built within us when we allow that promptings and those whispers of the Holy Spirit to guide us, and we trust it and we follow it. And when we step outside and we have those conversations, and all of a sudden it like, you see something happen, a connection happen, or that person ends up coming to church, or that person, fast forward 7 months, comes to faith or gets baptized at Mission. And, you know, if you go to like Acts chapter 9 and the story of Ananias, you know, Ananias, God invites him to go meet with Saul, who is the scariest person of that day. And my question is, what if Ananias said no? You know what I mean? Like, and the question for me is, what happens if I say no to this breakthrough of fear? What happens if I say no when God whispers and has me, what am I saying? My political beliefs or my association and allegiance is more important than that person potentially coming to discover what grace and peace is all about? Yeah. What's wrong with that picture?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly is what's at risk. I mean, that's sort of what's at stake for us. And, you know, not to mention what God might want to do through us reaching out to that person in us.
Oh,
like,
so
okay,
good.
There's what's at stake for the world not seeing, or, you know, but let alone God may be using somebody, which throughout the scriptures, God used outsiders. He used people who were not of the people of God to open the eyes of the people of God, which might actually do for some of us. He might actually open our eyes. Yes, it's about impacting them and what our faith would say by us reaching out, us stepping outside of our camp to listen, to learn, to understand, which we're going to talk a lot more about this weekend. But more so even that, what might God want to do? How might he open our eyes, mature our faith, change our minds about something we've always held to be true that may not be true and may not be the correct perspective?
Yeah, I love that. And I think, and maybe you feel this and see this, you know, from your experiences in New York and Georgia and Arizona. But, you know, as we started with fear, do you think that there's like a fear that people often have, or that I'm afraid that that person might influence me?
Yeah. Oh,
how would you
that's
say
the guilt by association. I mean,
exactly.
If I associate too much there, I'll lose my identity.
Yes.
You know, or I'll lose what I've held on to about me. And this is the exact point. Some of that needs to be let go of.
Oh, so good.
Some of that association and identity is stuff that keeps us from associating with Jesus more than anything else in our life. And whether it's right or wrong politically is almost not even the point. The point is we're holding on too tightly to our identity in those things over and above what it is to be a follower of Jesus, a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, a son and daughter of the King. And I think in this season, there's opportunity there. I like to flip the script and go, okay, instead of just, you know, us failing to show the world how great our faith is, what an opportunity for us to allow God to refine us and mature us, and at the same time, say something great to our world about our faith in God, such that we don't succumb to the fear of the political machine in this season. You get the last word.
Dude, so again, this is based off your teach. If I could show you my journal, I'm in an office here at a camp in northern Wisconsin, but I wrote down attention, association, allegiance. And my prayer this week is, Jesus, may you have my attention. Mm-hmm. Jesus, may you be what I find my association to. And Jesus, may you have my allegiance. And then underneath that, I was like, so wherever you want me to go, may I follow. And again, it's just those 3 words were so helpful for me, because I have my own fears. I have my own, my fears of association. Like, they're going to think I'm this, or they're going to think I'm this, or someone's going to see me talking to this. Like, no. If Jesus has my attention, if he has my association, he has my allegiance, then I'm willing to go wherever he asks me to go. And I'm hoping, praying that I'll have the courage and boldness to follow. So if that can be anyone listening, I'll tell you what, I've never been disappointed when I've stepped out and experienced God using me in those risk-taking moments, because it's us aligning our lives with God's heartbeat for humanity. And like you said so beautifully, it's not just eternally for them, it's also internally for us. Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful picture. So
yeah, that's good. Well, dude, thanks for taking time in the middle of Wisconsin, in the middle of the woods, to jump on with me today. It's so good to see you. That picture of you is so beautiful. So
pray for me. I'm praying for me, because I'm with a whole bunch of Badger fans and Packer fans. They need Jesus.
Gosh. Yeah, they do, for sure. Speaking of association and allegiance, those Packer fans, man, good gracious. Don't ever oppose one of them. They are fierce. Hey, it's good to talk with you. I look forward to seeing you back in this side of the country soon. Blessings on you. And thank you to everybody who's tuning into the podcast. If you found this conversation helpful, meaningful for you, chances are you know somebody who would as well. So we'd love for you to share. Make sure you subscribe and share so that you can pass along the helpful content that we're sharing here on the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next time.